Welcome to episode 2 of season 5 of the Filmmaker Film Watcher podcast. I'm filmmaker Richard DiGregorio.
And I am film watcher Greg Ralph.
This episode is the And Then There Were Nuns episode. Greg, tell us about it.
Well, this is a special one that you and I have been planning for an awfully long time. Regular listeners will remember that I think last season we had our sons on where they each chose a film.
That's right.
And we're going to do something like that again. We've invited a very special person, a nun, who just happens to also be my aunt and godmother, Auntie Marie, or Sister Marie, if you pardon the expression, for the uninitiated. And we asked her to come on with us and share the conversation about 3 films. 2 of those films being films about nuns. And the third film was, Marie, choose a film that you really like. It can be nuns or not nuns, so we get a different kind of perspective into the world of nuns.
Perfect. So welcome, Marie.
Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you, Greg.
You're most welcome. The 3 films that you've chosen for us, the first one is 1992's comedy, Sister Act.
Followed by 1995's drama, Dead Man Walking.
And we might not actually say what the third film is when we get to it. It's a bit of a surprise or suspense towards the end.
So, okay, kick it in, Greg. Tell us about Sister Act.
I first saw this 1992 film when I was studying in London as an 80th birthday outing for a British grand lady and a Dutch fellow student. With our differing religious backgrounds, we all came out of the cinema on a high. For me, it's become one of those films where it's hard to separate the movie from the original cinema experience. Sister Act tells the story of Dolores Van Cartier, Whoopi Goldberg, going through the motions as a Vegas Motown singer while hoping to marry Vince, Harvey Keitel, the casino boss and mobster with whom she's having an affair. After she witnesses a murder by Vince, Dolores ends up in witness protection, and her police protector, played by the aptly named Bill Nunn, decides the best place to hide her is an enclosed Catholic convent in downtown San Francisco. We've seen at the start of the film that young Dolores is not exactly nun-compatible, and she immediately clashes with the permanently dismayed Mother Superior, Maggie Smith. Newly christened as Sister Mary Clarence, Dolores develops friendships with the seriously quiet Sister Mary Robert, Wendy McKenna, and a perfectly cast Kathy Najimy as the boisterously, over-the-top, happy with a capital H Sister Mary Patrick. But Dolores chafes in the nuns' old-fashioned habit and struggles to fit into their Spartan convent life. And after a late-night visit to the bikie bar across the street, she's assigned to the musically challenged convent choir and immediately becomes its director, taking over from the ancient Sister Mary Lazarus, Mary Wicks. Dolores teaches her choir the basics of musical performance and then blends their traditional Catholic approach with a more crowd-pleasing Motown style. The scene of their first church performance is an absolute highlight, musically and in terms of story and character development. As Dolores rediscovers her musical joie de vivre and it spreads among the nuns and then out into the wider community, the public profile is raised of the supposedly hidden mob witness. In the lead up to their big concert for the Pope, Dolores has to stay alive and on the right side of Mother Superior. Sister Act was originally written for Bette Midler, who then passed it up to her later regret as it became one of the biggest comedy successes of the 1990s. Its direction was at one point offered to Pedro Almodovar, but he also refused it. The script went through many rewrites and script doctors, including Carrie Fisher, to the point where the original writer, Paul Rudnick, who also wrote In and Out, which I quite like, had his name removed from the credits. Even after Whoopi was cast and filming began, there were constant story changes, to the point where she refused to do promotional publicity for the film. It must have been quite a challenge for director Emile Ardolino, who also directed Dirty Dancing, who died the following year. On reflection, I think some of this story turmoil shows, particularly in a casino chase at the end that feels undisciplined. Its strength as a comedy comes from character and the performances. And it is so good to see long-time character comedian Mary Wicks in a fittingly scene-stealing end-of-career performance as Sister Mary Lazarus. On a side note, she was also in 1954's White Christmas, which we reviewed back in our Christmas 2016 special, a film which had the original Sister Act song comically performed by Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby. I enjoyed the swiftly made sequel, Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit, even though it wasn't as good as this one. I'm hoping that the longer gestation of Sister Act 3, currently in pre-production for Disney Plus, will serve us better. Sister Marie, how did you go with the act?
First of all, I'll say how I'm going with this act. I'm sitting here with these two bearded men dressed up in nuns' habits.
Shh, that was meant to be our secret.
The only indication that I am a sister is I'm wearing a scarf that has penguins on it.
Yes, we both look much more nunly than you do.
We do.
Although you are wearing our special filmmaker, film watcher
Yes.
merch jacket.
I will put a photo of us all on Instagram to show you.
And you'll
all.
black out my face,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. To show
And maybe
nun's
Marie's.
habit. The nun's habit. So yeah, what did you think, Marie?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I watched it probably back in about 1999, and I watched it the other night with two other sisters in the room, and it made it even funnier. And a few times we had to turn it off because it was remember when, and I'll tell you this story about, it was bringing back memories for us.
Wow.
Like when you were just saying about the uncomfortableness
Well,
of
I'm quite hot in this outfit at the moment, and I don't mean hot, I mean hot.
Well, in the days when we did wear these habits, we had sisters who used to do the starching for us. They starched the gamps and the coifs.
Right.
And they knew how to starch it, like from here to there. And so it wasn't terribly uncomfortable. It was okay. But about 10 years after we were in the habit, we went back to Broken Hill for the centenary of the sisters arriving there.
Now, we should say for our overseas listeners, Broken Hill is as outback as you can get in Australia.
Yes. So we had this celebration, and we had to make our own habits. We made them because we wanted to do the a memorial of the founding of Broken Hill, which was 5 professed sisters and a postulant. And I made most of the habits, and I don't know who starched them. I probably was involved in that as well. But we starched them right up to here, well above our ears. And we were on stage. We were doing a little act on stage.
Oh, wow.
They wanted us to wear the habits then the next day out to the picnic so everyone could see them at the picnic that they were having. And I had to drive the car. Unfortunately, I was in the street where the Zinc Lakes are, where we were having the picnic, so I didn't have to do a whole lot of twisting and turning, but it would have been, disaster. But we celebrated with the people, and then as a surprise, the 6 of us went up on stage. We came out the back. They didn't see us coming out. As we went around, we passed a bar. I think it was the Masonic Hall or something, but there were men at a bar, and I was the last nun in the line, and he called me over. And then he started talking to me as sister. Oh, sister, and then he was going on this big story. I thought, I have to go. And I said, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm in a play and they've all gone and I have to get on stage before the curtains are drawn. And he said, oh, sorry, sister, I thought you were a real nun. So that's the habit, but due to our reminder.
So picking up on your words there, how real is this film in terms of nuns?
Nuns, yeah.
Well, a lot of it is real. I mean, it's got a spin on it, of course.
Yeah.
All the funny things have got a spin. But there were some things where we just had to turn off the movie and have a bit of a talk about what life was like. So the first thing you've mentioned is the habit. The second thing was the silence. They were eating their meals in silence, and then Dolores sits down and starts complaining about the food, and then they're all put into silence. Now, I never saw that kind of a punishment where you're in silence until tea time or whatever time she made it. But she just couldn't understand the silence, and then they're out gardening, they're all in silence. Well, we had a lot of silence in our lives. Some days we talked at breakfast, which meant we then talked for the whole day. Sometimes we didn't talk till lunch, and then we talked for the time after that. And sometimes, particularly in Lent, we mightn't really talk to each other. And we had afternoon recreation, so 4 o'clock till 5 we'd talk to each other. Then we'd have talk for tea, and then we'd have a half an hour in the evening. But other than those times, we were in silence.
That would kill me.
Wow.
Well, my family did say, they knew I was going when I was entering, that there were 10 days without rules, where we just got oriented into convent living. And then there was an 8-day silent retreat. They thought I'd last for half of that, so they expected me back 10 plus 4, a fortnight's time. They thought I'd last there about 2 weeks.
And then after the silence, after the 8 days, they found you at the pub, like in the movie?
No.
With the bikies.
With the bikies?
No.
No. Dancing with the jukebox?
So the silence was certainly part of it. And then the other thing, when she was shown to her bedroom, it was called a cell, and we used to call our bedrooms cells in those days.
Oh, wow.
And all that was in them was a small wardrobe and a little cabinet that was steel, and a chair and your bed, and that was it. There was no other furniture, no decorations,
or books or anything.
No, nothing. No.
Not the Bible?
No, your Bible would have been down the chapel.
Ah, not like a hotel room where they have the Bible like right next to the bed. So I thought maybe
they were expected to memorise.
That's right.
It's like that old joke about the old joke about the people who know the jokes so well they call it the numbers they'll laugh. A bit like in the cells at night. John 1:23. Oh, that's a wonderful one. You know. And if you want people to laugh, you just say Jesus wept. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she asked, "Where's the rest of the furniture?" And the Mother Superior said that our lives are simple. We have little need for material possessions. And that really struck me today, because I thought, I'm in the middle of packing now to leave Melbourne after being here for 3 years. In those earlier days, we had 2 suitcases. Everything fitted in the suitcases. So you went from one town to the next with your 2 suitcases. So far, I've packed 20 medium-sized boxes, I suppose, apple boxes. I've packed 20 of those. And then I've packed about 10 smaller ones, and there's a lot more packing to go. So, for the simplicity of our early lives.
How many of those boxes are DVDs?
They're not packed yet.
Okay.
Then the other thing was bed at 9 and getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, for us, we rang a night prayer bell at 9 o'clock, so we had silence. Not only silence of voices, but we kept our eyes downcast. We were reflecting and meditating from 9 o'clock on. 10 o'clock, lights out. And then we didn't get up till 5:30, but the sister who did the call, who had to go around and call on the rooms, Lord Jesus, preserve us in peace. Sister answered amen. We knew she was awake, and then move on. That sister would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So poor old Dolores, I know how she suffered, because I was a night person before I entered the convent and not a morning person at all.
Yeah, right.
Did you have a favourite scene in the film?
Oh, I'd have to say that I enjoyed the singing when they were singing, and nothing you can say can take me away from my God, that kind of thing. I like that.
Yeah, I think my favourite moment. I think this is a wonderful film.
You haven't actually said what you think yet.
No, yeah. I think it's so enjoyable. It's I saw it at the cinema. It's a beautiful cinema in Narooma, New South Wales. On a holiday, I was quite young, and we just went and saw the movie.
15, 14, 15.
And I loved it. I didn't know what I was going to expect from it, but it was such an enjoyable film. And rewatching it, my moment, which gave me tingles in the cinema, I remember back then, was when Sister Mary Robert starts singing confidently, and she just breaks out in song. That got me, and it gets me every time I see it. It's such a beautiful moment.
They redo that moment in Sister Act. Have you seen Sister Act 2?
I started Sister Act 2 and I turned it off a while ago because I just got a bit bored by it. And I think it was made a year later.
Yeah, it was
They
rushed.
would have rushed it, and I just think it shows.
The director died in between, so he didn't have the same hand on the tiller.
Yeah.
They do the same thing, though, in Sister Act 2 with a young male student, where he's the same kind of revelation. For me, it's actually Hail Holy Queen. The first song they sing with Whoopi at the helm, and they sing beautifully in the very traditional Catholic way, and it's kind of like, oh, that's nice. And then suddenly the clapping starts, and you're not expecting that, and then you go into this really upbeat and very, very joyful version of the same song, and at the same time you've got Mother Superior, Maggie Smith, kind of glowering the pews.
Who's wonderful. She's really great in the role. I mean, it's so good. Yeah. She's so good. And without an actor like Maggie Smith in that role, it would fall flat a bit. It would, she. I mean, every character in it is very good, and everybody does a great job.
Midler in the lead. I think it would have been a very different film.
It would have been a different film. I mean, she's a wonderful singer. She would have still done a great job, I think. But Whoopi, it's Whoopi at her best. Comedically,
it is. Well, she'd done Ghost 2 years prior.
Did she
win the Oscar for that?
I think she did. I think she did. Yeah.
As the clairvoyant.
Yes, and she was great in that. But this here, there's a. I don't know. There's a.
I said it's the joie de vivre, but really what it is, when I thought about it, is she's lost it. You know, she's been in Vegas doing Motown, and it's all by the paces, and getting a bit annoyed at the woman next to her when her hand goes too close to obscuring her. I
find
that
funny, actually.
Yeah, and she's got this relationship that's not really going anywhere. And then she goes to the convent. She's pretty grumpy about the whole thing. But then once she's in charge of the choir and she helps these other women blossom, she herself blossoms, and then it just radiates out. To the community. And that's one of the things I love about the Hail Holy Queen scene, is that the people start coming in from the street. They're going, like, what is this? And that's the beginning of the change of everything.
Yes.
And the priest is welcoming her in. It's a real scene. I love it.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The singing for me, whenever they were singing, that really captured you. And that's what I remembered about the movie from when I'd seen it back in the 1999 or whatever it was.
92, yeah.
But the other thing that grabbed me too was, you've just been speaking about it, Greg, when they came out to the people.
Yes.
You know, skipping with the children.
Because they are an enclosed order, we're told
They were a Carmelite enclosed order.
Yep.
And as she complained to the police at one stage, all they do is pray and work. You know, she wasn't impressed with their lifestyle. But she came out, when she did that, then they came out and saw what a difference they could make for those people's lives. And in fact, what it did for themselves too.
Yes.
But they were running, you know, a kitchen for the homeless, daycare centre, and then all that interaction with people I thought was wonderful. And the reason that touches me is that it was St. Catherine's Church, and our foundress, the foundress of the Sisters of Mercy, Catherine Macaulay, she had no intention of founding a religious order, but she inherited all this money and made the decision to build a house in the very rich part of Dublin. The women who were very rich around there didn't like the poor all coming in, because that's why she built it, to bring the poor in, to educate the women and the children. So they objected. But not long after that, they saw what she was doing, and these rich women were coming in. They were well educated. They were part of the education thing for the children. Brought their maids with them who did all the cooking and the sewing and the cleaning and preparing all the food. And they prayed together. She was a deeply spiritual person, so they had prayer together. Then when the bishop heard of this, he came to her and said, "You can't do this. You're founding a religious order. You can't do that without the permission of the church." Anyway, she negotiated with him that this religious order would be different. They wouldn't be enclosed. They wouldn't be a contemplative order. They would continue doing what they'd always done, go out to the poor, go out to the sick. And that's how the order started. And it just flourished. She only lived for 10 years after she founded the order. And there were 9 foundations in Ireland and 1 in England when she died. Wow. So that touched me, the fact that, you know, they're out there with the people like that.
Well, I think what you're saying is that it would be very easy to dismiss this film as kind of a wisecracking comedy. And, it's got its jokes, got some great lines in it.
Oh, it does.
I mean, I like the one from Maggie Smith saying to Dolores, "God has brought you here. Take the hint." You know, there's some really nice things, you know, and when she tells the nuns in the casino, try and blend in.
I know, try and blend
There's
in.
funny jokes, but they're usually character situational jokes. But it's not just a comedy. It really is about how Dolores is rebooted.
Reborn.
Reborn is probably a better
She is,
metaphor, and does it to the community around her, but also to the individual. She does it to Grumpy Mary Lazarus. She does it to quiet, I'll pretend I'm not here, Sister Mary Robert. She embraces the spirit of the boisterous nun, Sister Mary Patrick, Kathy Najimy, and she turns the Mother Superior, Maggie Smith, she turns her around too, from wanting to protect her nuns by shutting them off from the world and making her realise that there's actually a better way.
Yes.
There's depth to the story is what I'm saying.
Oh, I think so.
Which I think reflects back what you're saying about Catherine Macaulay, for example.
I think the lesser parts of the film are the bits with the gangsters and them chasing and whatnot. I think that's
I
meant
like
to
the
be.
bit when the gangster said we can't shoot a nun. Even though
of course.
Dolores not a nun.
Of course, but all of that's fun. But the joy of this film comes with the nuns and the singing and the and their interactions. That's where you get the joy from the film. I mean, I think the slapstick antics of the gangsters, really, I mean, that's just the...
Well, I wonder if that's where the problems were with the story. And as I said in the opening, I really felt that when they're sort of going through the pokies area, all with their veils, so it's hard to work out which one's actually Dolores when the gangsters are trying to get her and kill her. It was okay, but it could have been a lot better. Or even when one of the nuns, won obviously a lot of coins on the pokies, they kind of moved on from that. Something more could have been done with that. It was just that whole section to me felt like it really hadn't been properly worked through. But when you know the backstory to the production, it's not a big surprise.
I really like the detective.
Your nun.
Yes,
He loved Dolores. He liked her, didn't he?
He did. I really liked him. He had a real warmth to that character. So he was actually he cared for her, and
I kept
really
waiting for that to turn into a romance.
Oh, really?
Because she's not a real nun. Let's remember.
I didn't think it would. I didn't think that was going to happen, but no.
Well, it has been turned into a stage musical.
Yes, it has.
Yes, premiered in 2010, and Whoopi either has and or is going back to the stage to play the Mother Superior this time, which is an interesting concept in its own right. But I wonder, I've got no idea, I wonder if in the musical, the cop and the singer, the pretend nun, actually do fall in love, because that's a more typical musical thing.
Sister Act 3, you're saying, is in pre-production.
Yes.
Is she attached to that?
Oh, very much so.
As Dolores in it?
There's no details yet. You would assume so.
You'd hope so.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Because she still looks amazing, Whoopi.
Well, a lot of the older nuns have died since they made it, because this is 30 years ago. And a lot of them would have been at least 60 plus. The main ones are still going strong. Maggie Smith, Kathy Najimy, Wendy McKenna and Whoopi, of course. But so I don't know what they're going to do with it. I mean, just the outline of the second film is that Whoopi's called back to pretend to be a nun again because the nun school is kind of going off the rails a bit, and they want the kids, I think it is, to enter into a musical contest, a la Glee, before Glee. I don't know what they do with it, but she's certainly attached, but I don't know what capacity.
And I love the end when it's the Pope. And you think, are we going to see the Pope?
Who actually makes his career out of playing the Pope.
Oh, really?
Yes.
But you never actually see the face. It's just from behind. It's meant to be Pope John Paul at that time. The second at that time.
I watched some of the making of featurettes. He really, up close, he looks like the Pope.
I was just thinking about when you just said about Whoopi being reborn. Like, the nuns changed, but also she changed. I'm wondering if in 3 she might become a nun and be finally professed. No, but I mean, you remember how one said to the, what's his name, the boss, she's been acting weird. Like she was calm and just sitting there and not yelling at them. Or
to Vince, the mobster.
Yeah. But just to his two
henchmen,
yeah. Just the way she was with them. You saw the difference in her, that there had been a change in her as well. So she might come back and be a nun.
Well, we'll see, hopefully.
And just before we get on to our scores, I wanted to ask you a technical question. Did you notice the mistake made in the very opening scene when you see Dolores as a schoolgirl in the nun's classroom?
A mistake, no.
Since she's being asked to name the apostles, and she makes a joke by naming the Beatles.
Yes.
But the nun's nodding approvingly while she says John Paul. Paul was not an apostle.
That's
I'm
right.
sorry.
Oh, right.
I did note
That's
that.
the case.
Oh, wow.
Proud of me.
Yeah. I'm very proud of you. Yeah.
Oh, that's
yeah.
she
was nodding for John Paul.
I know.
Wow.
And then gets upset with George and Ringo. Auntie Marie, out of 10, how would you rate this film and why?
If I was watching it alone, I'd probably give it about an 8. But having enjoyed it so much with the other sisters, and looking at some of the depth that's in it as well, I'd give it a 9.
And you, Ricardo?
I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. I think it's up there, and I think it's a really enjoyable film. It was so popular back then, but people always still remember it. It is, for its genre, up there with the best of them in that. So I'm giving it an 8.
Well, I was wavering a bit like a lapsed Catholic perhaps, between a 7 or an 8, because I love it. And I said in the opening, for me it's also very associated with when I first saw it all those years ago. But I worried a bit, is it because there's a lot more in it if you're Catholic that you can respond to and pick up on? And probably, as you say, Auntie Marie, a lot more if you're a nun as well. But, and I was thinking, but you know what? And particularly after this conversation and thinking about that whole blossoming and how that spreads out, I think it's an 8 as well. 8 out of 10 for me.
Snap.
So to continue with our And Then There Were Nuns episode, where special guest star Auntie Marie, or Sister Marie, Ricardo, take us on to the next film.
Directed by Tim Robbins, who is most known as an actor in films such as Shawshank Redemption, The Player, and Spielberg's War of the Worlds, this powerful 1995 film, Dead Man Walking, centres its theme around capital punishment. Based on a true story, the film focuses on a caring nun, Sister Helen Prejean, Susan Sarandon, who works in the poor African-American street Thomas projects of New Orleans. She receives a desperate letter from death row inmate Matthew Poncelet, Sean Penn, trying to find help to avoid execution for the murder of a teenage couple. He has been on death row for the last 6 years. He committed his crimes with Carl Vitello, who was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. As his scheduled execution date approaches, Poncelet asks Sister Helen Prejean to help him with a final appeal. Although inexperienced in criminal chaplaincy, Sister Prejean becomes Poncelet's spiritual counsellor and connects with Poncelet, who at first advises that he did not kill the teenage couple and that his accomplice did the killing. Poncelet can be 1 minute vulnerable, in need of Sister Helen's guidance, and the next minute he can be arrogant, rude, sexist, and racist, which offers no help in trying to convince the state to have his sentence changed to life imprisonment. She gets to know Poncelet's mother, Lucille, and also the families of the 2 victims, who cannot believe she can offer support to the man who killed their children. They feel like she is taking Poncelet's side. They need justice, his life for those of their children. In her words, Sister Helen says she's trying to follow the example of Jesus, who said that a person is not as bad as his worst deed. This is such a memorable film. It really looks into capital punishment argument from both sides. As a father, I can completely understand the family's desires to have their justice on Poncelet. That's such a primal response. However, the question is, does the government or state have the right to kill another human being? Does that make them murderers also? Tim Robbins handles the direction with such subtlety. Every camera move or expression is handled with the utmost respect in the argument put forward to his audience. Sean Penn and Susan Sarandon are both simply amazing in their roles. Susan won Best Actress at the Oscars for this role in a very competitive year, while Sean Penn lost out to Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas. It's such a moving film. Marie, what did you think of Dead Man Walking?
I was very moved by it. I just thought the acting was so superb. You just mentioned, Susan and Sean. When Susan was moved, I found myself very moved. She was often in tears. I felt she had a real sense of what was going on. I couldn't feel it was just acting. I felt like she was responding to the storyline.
You really felt her pressure in the situation, being, there's that pressure she had on, from all sides. And that she's trying to do the right thing by him, by her faith, but also by the people around her. So it's a lot of pressure on her. So when she goes into the bathroom in one scene where she's just finding it very hard to deal with.
And it's also moving in that it's a true story. With Sister Helen.
Well, it is.
I'll come in with that. I know that Sister Helen, when she wrote the book, this is a composition of 2 people that she talked to who were executed in jail. So it's not just a person. There's no Matt as such. Matt is a composite of 2 other characters. But she's still doing this. But I'd just like to say, first of all, on something that's very topical. Tonight in Sydney, there's a Benedictine sister who's 86 years old, Joan Chichester, very well known to probably every Catholic sister in Australia and throughout the world. Very well known. She's an author of 50 books, been on extensive tours, has 12 honorary doctorates. She was introduced to us as Sister Dr. Chichester. But one of the things that struck me when she was talking to us, and she talked in the Melbourne Town Hall, it was absolutely packed, mainly with women and probably with a lot of nuns. I recognised quite a few. But anyway, what she was on about was to follow Jesus, we have to follow Jesus the healer and Jesus the prophet. Jesus the healer is the one depicted in the gospel who's caring and comforting and healing. But Jesus the prophet also in the New Testament is the one who's challenging any unjust system. And because he does that, he's rejected by a lot of people and eventually killed. Now, what I see in this movie, I see this Sister Helen as the prophet and the healer. And I'd just like to go through a few parts where she does actually challenge Matthew. Like she's there engaging with him. He knows that she really cares. She becomes the comforter, the one he can trust. But we also see her throughout the movie really challenging Matthew. It wasn't just comforting, but really challenging. So he got to that point in the end where the truth set him free.
Yes.
So, right from the beginning, he speaks disparagingly about the Afro-Americans in the neighbourhood. She lives in this poor neighbourhood, mainly of Afro-Americans, as you know. He speaks very disrespectfully about his first ex-wife and declares he didn't kill anybody. He said he was scared of Carl, the accomplice. He didn't murder anyone, Carl did it. But then she says, you watched him kill those young kids. You stood there and watched. So that was the first indication that, yes, he's going to be challenged. When he makes racist comments, she asks if he's known any black people and has he played with black children. And, of course, he was flippant in that answer. Yeah, we did. We threw stones at them. But there was the question for him. At his trial, it was reported that he called the judge Cap and he smirked when the jury found him guilty. She challenged his behaviour and his attitude and said to him, it's easy to kill a monster, but it's hard to kill a human being. Something to think about for him. When he doesn't want his mother at the trial because she'll burst out crying, she tells him that she's his mother and asks, what if you die and she hasn't had the chance to stand up for you? Matthew is quoted in the newspaper as racist, admiring Hitler, saying that he'd do something useful if he had his time again, like bombing government buildings. Helen's aghast, telling him he's making it easy for people to want him executed. He's coming across as a crazed animal, a Nazi, a racist, a mad dog who deserves to die. As it goes on now, she asks him, does he ever think about those young teenagers who were brutally murdered? Does he think about the parents? Then he says, well, it's hard for him to have sympathy for the parents when they want him dead. But Helen then says again, think about them, those parents whose children were raped, shot and stabbed. In the last 3 days, she reflects with Matt on Jesus in the Bible. Matt says Jesus is different from him. He's a turn the other cheek guy. Helen assures him it takes a lot of strength to turn the other cheek. When she reminds him that he likes rebels and Jesus was a rebel, Matt rejects this claim and says, no, Jesus was a love your brother person. Helen points out that the love of Jesus changed things. And this is what another thing that Joan Chittister said to us, there's a lot of injustice out there. There are a lot of institutions that need to be challenged. But time won't change them. People will. And she ended her talk by saying 3 times very slowly, things don't change, people do. And she said all those people nobody cared about, prostitutes, beggars, the poor, they finally in Jesus had someone who respected them, loved them, made them realise their own worth. The guys at the top, she said, got real nervous and so they had to kill Jesus. After that, the sharing became very deep between Helen and Matt. I found it very touching to witness it. There were little movements in him, but basically you could see the road that he was coming down, really listening to her and understanding the challenges. But Helen told him he had some work to do, reflecting on the words of Jesus, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. Matt said he liked that and he would think about that. And then Helen said to him, I want you to die with dignity. You can't do that unless you own up to the part you played in Hope and Walter's deaths. I found that the acting and all of that was just superb. The way they looked at each other and the way Matt responded, showing that he was really taking it all in. So you saw him moving from being flippant about it to where he was very engaged with what she was saying.
Ultimately, throughout the whole film, he really needed some guidance. I mean, it's obviously the character hasn't had a lot of guidance in his life. He's come from a very, very low-income family.
Broken home.
Interesting to see young Jack Black in the role. I hadn't seen the movie for a very long time, so I didn't realise that he was in
Did you
that.
spot the other face?
No.
So Walter, the boy who was killed, that's Peter Sarsgaard.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. But I think there's that to and fro between the two. Like he just sort of goes back to, who are you? Have you ever dealt with a murderer before? To being so vulnerable. That's why the performance was so good, because he could go back and forwards between the two within a second.
I know.
Within a heartbeat, there was this vulnerable little kid to then the bravado of just, this is me.
And he was also a de facto father to his younger brothers as well.
Yes.
You see that when the family comes to visit towards the end. Again, you see another side of him.
How do you feel, though? Because we haven't heard from you yet.
Well, I have two overall responses to this film. The first one is that it struck me this time around, and because we've been looking at, Sister Act as well, there aren't actually many films out there that treat nuns as real people and with a sense of compassion. They're either figures of fun, like, Sister Act and Blues Brothers, as we've talked about. They're sources of evil or suffering, so things like the Nun or Philomena, for example. Or they're symbols, like a metaphor for something else. So there's a not very well-known film from 1977 that uses a convent kind of election as a metaphor for Watergate called Nasty Habits with Glenda Jackson. So but when you stop and think about it, maybe even on one hand, if that, the number of films where nuns are real and it takes seriously what they're on about. It's not some sort of Hollywood romanticised version
It's
of a nun.
very true. I can't think of one.
It is about faith in action.
I literally can't think of one.
The only one that I wonder about, and never having seen it, and Auntie Marie, you may have done, is 1950-something Audrey Hepburn in the Nun story. But that's more like a romance story about she falls in love with this doctor. And so I don't know. There'll be documentaries and there'll be things very much targeted, at a Catholic audience, for example. But I think this film, in that respect, is quite unusual. And it was interesting this time around as I was watching, I was picking up on things. Oh, sorry, I think there is one other exception. There's another exception, which is the superb 1991 Australian TV series, The Brides of Christ. I think that's the only other exception.
Of course,
but we don't do TV series on our podcast. But there was a lot that came through for me this time about all the expectations around her, what a nun should be and do and shouldn't do. And the first time you really see it is the first time she goes into the office to meet the prison chaplain, Father Farley. And one of the first things he says to her is, "Where's your habit?" And I've grown up with nuns, including but not limited to Auntie Marie. And I read the superb expression on Susan Sarandon's face. You could see exactly what she was thinking. It comes back with a very diplomatic answer while standing up for herself. But again, that to me, just because of the nuns that I know, that rang absolutely true. And then there are people saying, you should be out teaching children, you should be taking sides. There's a lot in there about a nun as a person and as a real lived faith. So for me, that's kind of almost the happy side of the coin. My other response is that for me, this was a tremendously emotional experience. I was sobbing at times. I was watching my own and sobbing. And I realised it's because I've only seen this film once before, not long after it came out. And two things have changed in my life since I first saw it. The first one is, like yourself, Ricardo, I've become a parent. And so that gives you a whole other insight into the story.
Absolutely.
And I think that Raymond J. Barry, who plays Walter's father, the one whose wife leaves him, basically, I thought his performance, I don't know what he's been in before or since, but I thought he was just superb in that part.
He was very good.
The other parents, they were good, and particularly in their scene with Sister Helen. But it was his part of the story that really touched me.
Yes.
So I've become a parent. But the other thing that's happened is that since I last saw this film, I know two families that are close to me who have lost a child as they were around the age of Walter and Hope. And in one of those cases, the life lost was due to the actions of another who went to jail for a while. And so it was actually much easier for me to enter into the world of the parents, because I now know, I'm one or two steps removed, but I now know in actuality how really hard that is to forgive.
Yeah.
And so I could not stop myself from entering into their world while watching this film. And the fact that the film is ostensibly, really about Sister Helen and Matthew, and that's the core of the story, and that's what I responded to the first time around. And the arguments about capital punishment. And it's what's great about this film is it's not preaching, it's testament, but it's not preaching.
That's right. It doesn't, and it really looks at both sides. It doesn't. It doesn't. I know that Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon are against capital punishment, but they don't labour that. They really look at both sides and let you the audience make up their own mind, really, in terms of what they believe at the very end. I don't think it's definitely not preachy.
So for me, this time around, the parents, particularly Walter's father, for me, they were the emotional heart of the story. Not to take other parts out, and not about when his family turns up and that awkwardness and his journey that he goes on in the space of 6 days, which I've just realised is how long it took to create the world, according to the Old Testament. Whether the 6 days was kind of symbolic as well. I've got no idea what the reality is. But, I found this a very difficult film to watch. One that I couldn't stop watching, but for me it was very, very difficult. And I don't know that I could be like that father if it had happened to one of my children.
Forgiveness is a big thing. And I think that's a real big part of whether you can forgive, whether it takes time to forgive, whether it just takes time.
Well, they don't show that he doesn't do a big turnaround. He's still praying for her in the church at the end.
That's right.
The end point of the film.
That's right. But I mean, over many years, whether that forgiveness, whether you can, and there's been some families can, some families can't. It really depends on the.
Well, you see both aspects of that because in the other family with the husband and the mother and the father. And the father says at the execution, well, he didn't apologise to me. He's never going to be on that journey.
He's not, but it's quite interesting when that sequence was happening. It was like he was not enjoying that as much as he thought he would.
Which
that experience
I think is part of the message.
Yeah, that's right.
And in fact, in the real stories, because as Marie says, this is a combined and to a degree fictionalised version of two real relationships in Sister Helen's life that they've combined and so on. But that really did happen at one of the executions. One of the fathers said that. So that's real.
Wow.
I loved what this film did with eyes all the way through.
Well, expression. Yeah, just expression in general.
Sometimes I kind of felt Susan Sarandon, there was a bit too much of the eye moving around. It kind of distracted me a bit. But when she first meets Matthew...
No,
I didn't feel that.
Not at all.
I can see your faces.
No.
It's okay. You're allowed to be wrong.
Yeah.
No, she was just perfect. But I felt her every expression and every moment.
But when she first went to see him in the prison, on that very first visit, there was a lot made of the grill between them and how sometimes light reflected off, so you couldn't actually see them in a moment. Yes. There was lots of things about them reflecting off glass of each other.
That's true.
At the execution, the dead boy and girl's reflections are in the window of the execution chamber.
I thought that was a really...
And there's a really lovely moment where there's a close-up of the eyes of the dead boy and girl, young man and young woman, and then it goes straight to the same close-up of Susan Sarandon's eyes as Sister Helen. And I thought that was a really interesting way to say this is shared humanity.
At that point, mate, you were sort of feeling for Matthew Poncelet at that time. She's walking him to his execution, to his death, and he's crying and he's asking for, saying sorry to the family. So at that point, you're feeling sorry for him. Maybe he shouldn't die. But then when the execution is happening, which is quite a hard sequence to watch, they show the scene of what he actually did in full of what he did while that's happening. And it just throws you into so many different directions because you're going, oh, maybe they shouldn't, but oh my God, look what he did.
Yeah.
And it does. It really toys with you.
Capering around while it's happening.
It's one of the most powerful. It is up there for probably one of the most powerful and moving sort of films, which challenges you and your thoughts on this topic the most. I mean, there's been other films on execution. There's The Green Mile, which is another a very good film as well. But it doesn't tap into this. This does challenge you.
Well, do you know in the original two prisoners' lives in which he was first engaged that the stories are based on, neither of them were killed by lethal injection. No. They were both electric chairs.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's probably for two reasons. One is that maybe showing an electrocution might have been just a bit too much for
Yeah.
the audience. But the other thing which I'd heard said is that part of the reason they went for the lethal injection is so they could have that scene when he is raised with his arms outstretched on that table to be a Christ on the cross kind of image, which on one level is really, really interesting. But another level is, it's kind of funny because I actually think she's the Christ-like. She's the Christ-like figure in the story.
She is, yeah.
But now she's kind of the woman at the foot of the cross with the arm outstretched
Yeah,
towards the Jesus figure. And I don't
right.
think that's been got quite right.
That's true, actually, yeah. What did you think about that?
Yeah, that didn't come to me about the crucifixion and putting him in the position of Jesus. But another thing that I wanted to talk about too was how often the scene of the raping and killing was shown over and over again. Like if we add up, it might have been 8, 9 times,
Quite a few
10
times. They showed it bits and pieces and then just cut through and
But then you get the full thing, as
then
you
you
say
get
at
the
the
full
end.
thing, yeah.
But it keeps Helen and us in touch with the horror of the brutality of the two young lovers, what happened to them, the brutality that they were dealt, and reminding us of the utter distress of their parents. So there, you mentioned that too. There's this balance. There's all this feeling for Matthew and what he's going through, and then it keeps on bringing you back to what they actually suffered. These kids, this lovely couple, what they suffered. I thought that was a good part of the film where it kept on showing you that, and you two talking as parents to help us understand to some extent what that was like for those parents. So I just thought that moving backwards and forwards, showing us that, kept us grounded in 2 parts of the story. The other thing was Helen's care for others in the story. She wasn't just caring for that man who was going to be executed, but we saw how she cared for others. And so she visits his mother and the brothers, and she's very empathetic. Like, she's a beautiful woman. So she's there with them helping. You know, her own parents tried to discourage her from doing, you should be with the children. You know, this is too much for you. When she meets Walter Delacroix's father, who admonishes her for not visiting, then what does she do? She says, I didn't know that I'd be accepted. I didn't know that you'd want me to be there.
Yeah.
But the fact that he said that, she then goes to visit Hope's parents and Walter's parents, rejected, especially by Hope's parents.
Well, they were just like, well, how can you help
change
him?
sides.
And we could do with your help. Why weren't you with us,
Yeah, changing sides, you know. That's their attitude, you change sides. And she didn't see it as taking sides. She was there as Jesus the healer for them, really, and Jesus the prophet for Matthew.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that perspective.
So that balance that we're shown about Sister Helen in the movie is still going on in her life today. She continues her work, dividing her time between educating the public, campaigning against the death penalty, counselling individual death row prisoners, and working with murder victims' family members. Also, I thought that the change that took place in Matthew over those 6 days, when he went to his death, he was asked, "Are there any last words, Matthew?" And he said yes, and he deeply and sincerely apologised to Mr. Delacroix for taking his son away from him and asked for forgiveness. He expressed his desire to Hope's parents that his death might give them some relief. Then he also claimed that killing was wrong, whether it be by him or by other people or the government, that killing someone is always wrong. And then he tells Helen he loves her, and she mouths back, and I love you. But I was thinking, like, after the first trial, where he just smirked.
Yes.
And now that the parents watch him go there and not call out, not be enraged, no hate words that might have come if Helen hadn't been on that journey with him, but just the difference in him over those 6 days. And like his feeling for his mother and his brothers.
Yes.
As you said, like he's in the room with them, and just for a few moments you see them as a family, bantering. He was joining you with the bantering. That was lovely.
Which must be so hard to do when you think, I'm going to be dead in a few hours.
Yeah.
That's right.
But you saw his relationship there with the mother. He's left his mother with that, and like her last words that we didn't hear the phone call, but the last words were, "We all love you." So for her to think back to that moment I think it'd be a very significant moment in her life. And I think for the parents, that it was easier to listen to that than to listen to all the hate and the anger and that
and
he
the
had.
bullying at school that we hear about, or the brother.
Yeah, I mean, all that they all had to go through. So
the moment he tells the truth to her, that's a marvelous scene. When he finally gets to that
and he
point, and
cries.
she's trying to get the truth out of him because she knows that he did, but she's waiting for the moment that he actually is able to say that, and it's only in those final hours that he's able to say that and breaks down about it, and that's such a breakthrough moment. It's I got tingles. It's so powerful.
By the way, did either of you notice in the film the real Sister Helen?
No, where was she?
Oh, she's there. I didn't notice it last time around, but I saw her and I thought, that woman is so a nun. So I stopped the film and went off to Google to find out. There's a scene where there's a vigil outside the jail when somebody else is being executed before Matthew.
Yes.
And there's a group over towards the fence, I think, with signs saying, this is a good thing, get on with it kind of stuff.
Yes.
And she's there with a group of people around a candle. Yes. And they're praying.
Yes.
The woman holding the candle is the real Sister Helen.
Oh, wow.
And at the risk of sounding very judgmental and generalising, I could tell. It was the haircut and it was the top she was wearing. I thought she was different to Margot Martindale, who plays the other nun, and Susan Sarandon, who were good in the part, but there was just the authenticity around her. She is in that scene. She's actually a technical consultant on the film.
Yeah, right.
And she's in this one scene. So I would urge you, and everyone, go back and watch that scene again. You'll see her. That's her. She's in it. It's really lovely to see.
Well, you can go back and watch that a bit of a blooper.
Yes, I told you. I think I told Mari as well.
In that scene where she's talking to Mr. Delacroix, and it's such a moving scene. He's showing photos of the sun, and it's quite moving. In fact, that shot itself is a beautiful shot, and I didn't realise this little mistake or this error.
I read about it and went back.
Well, because I'm just you're so engrossed in the scene. And then, as I said,
you told me that.
Yes. As I said in the opening piece, this is such a subtle film, and the way in his direction, Tim Robbins' direction, when he's telling the story, he pulls back slowly. He's not pulling into the story; he's pulling you out, and that keeps you in. But in the background, in the window, out the curtain window. There's a crew member that sort of jumps in the shot and then just literally hightails it.
It's hard to see because he's wearing a green shirt against
but he hightails it out of the shot. Once he knows. I watched it quite a few times. He sort of comes in just casually, and then it's literally just, I'm getting out of here. You see his arms sort of.
Murray, have you had a chance to see that scene yet?
Oh, it's quite funny in such a moving scene.
Well, look, before we move to our final scores, I have one more little factoid or fact check to share about this. Did you know it's been turned into an opera?
No.
There is an opera. Some of the names are changed. Like the Matthew character, I think, has got another name change again. But it's been turned into an opera that premiered on the 7th of October in the year 2000 at the San Francisco Opera. And it's also been turned into a play 3 years later. But I think seeing the opera would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Because
it would lend itself well to that story.
Well, I think it would, but I think it would also be a bit strange as well about how that would become an opera. Because sometimes opera can be a bit more distancing because it's more grandiose.
It is.
So I'd be curious to see how... It's probably a more modern opera. It won't be like a Puccini kind of thing, I imagine. Yeah. So if it ever came to town, I'd be actually quite interested in seeing it.
Another thing that did grab me about when I was watching this film is that I know 3 sisters very well who were prison chaplains.
Oh, wow.
And another sister who was a chaplain at Baxter Detention Centre in South Australia. And I was at Baxter one day with some other sisters, and there was this little buzz going on and something's happening, someone's coming. And so I thought, probably it's the person in charge of the jail, and in walked the nun. And they were all around her, with great appreciation.
Wow.
And then I visited a prison here with the sister who's the chaplain. And it was a very moving experience. The gratitude that was expressed to her. It was a night when they were showcasing some of the things they could do. There was a musical and an art display and beautiful food that they'd prepared. I was just touched the whole time. So I think, too, knowing 4 sisters who've worked with people in need like this,
Well, the prison chaplain, Father Farley, makes it very clear the second time she meets Father Farley that this is not woman's work. This is something that's done by a priest or a rabbi or an imam. It's men's work. And again, at the risk of overgeneralising, there's a real strength, as we see in the film, and as Mary in your story just now, some of the more feminine, traditionally perhaps feminine characteristics can be brought into that kind of ministry. But it just has a whole other dimension, another resonance that people respond to, as you say.
That priest wouldn't be typical of all the priests who are chaplains
No,
either.
of course not.
Yes, right.
But, his theory was you just have to make him come to confession, then he's right, receive the sacraments, and he's right. That's your job.
Yeah, right. Yes.
So it's almost a sausage factory kind of model.
Yeah. Whereas when you think of what she invested in that, and then and the rejection she suffered, like at the beginning of the movie when all those little kids loved her and in the classroom, full of fun. And yet those little kids walked out at one point because he was associated. Her name was associated with him, a racist. And then we were told that the people at the school wondered why she was spending all that time with him and not with them. She suffered the rejection that a prophet suffers. But her heart was in it, But I loved it that she was there for everyone. She wasn't just there for Matthew. She was there for everyone involved.
Yeah.
The parents in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, Murray, in some ways this is a bit of an unfair question, but talking about the film maybe rather than the broader situation as well. But as a film, for you, this one out of 10?
10.
Because
my heart was touched. Because I was moved from feeling for him and then feeling for the parents. I just thought it was absolutely superb acting. I just felt it almost wasn't acting. I felt like they were just responding to the storyline, and that's how I felt. And I felt
Doesn't get much better than what you saw there. That reaction.
Is that a hint to your score?
Yeah, I'm giving it a 10 as well. I just don't think that there's a film like it. I don't think there's a film which challenges like that does, especially for that topic. And it handles the argument in such a clever way.
Look, 3-way snap.
Oh,
2 out of
wow.
10.
Yeah.
I think you have to come into understanding this is not a film of historical truth. It's a film of emotional truth.
Yes.
But I really admire what you just described in the film, and which I was characterising earlier as that it's testament, not preaching, to use religious metaphors, because it would be very easy to make a preachy kind of film about this. And people with the reputation of Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon, who were a couple back when this film was made, of being, lefties and whatever else, it would be very easy to tar them with a brush that said this is a polemic. This is, preaching. It's not. It's testament. It bears witness to a range of perspectives and doesn't try and tie it up with the neat Hollywood bow as well.
So the final film we are going to discuss, we haven't really even mentioned yet. Auntie Marie, can you tell us why you've chosen this film, which you can tell us what it is?
And do you think it's an unusual film for me to have chosen?
Absolutely.
Well, I first saw The Sting back in about 1999, one of the DVDs that Greg sent me. And Sister Pat and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then we didn't have many DVDs at that stage, but we invited others to come over, have a meal and watch the movie. And they enjoyed it, but we watched it over and over. And I think the thing that we loved the music in it. Yeah. We loved the con in it. And I'm not allowed to go into that part of the story, but we were conned a couple of times as the people in the story were conned.
Okay, so we're talking about The Sting, which is the Robert Redford and Paul Newman classic. Mm-hmm. Before we get into that, maybe Greg, you can talk about The Sting.
Not many people would expect a nun to love a film with mob murders and ladies of doubtful moral virtue. And you may have to explain yourself a bit later, Auntie Marie. The Sting was made in 1973, but is set in Depression-era 1936. It opens with the 1930s Universal Studios logo and then is broken up into sections, each introduced by a title card in the style of that era's Norman Rockwell paintings in the Saturday Evening Post. In the opening act, grifter Johnny Hooker, Robert Redford, scams thousands of dollars from a guy on the street. His con artist mentor Luther, Robert Earl Jones, decides it's enough to retire on and advises Johnny to seek out his experienced Chicago-based friend, Henry Gondorff, Paul Newman, to take him to the next level. But their prize turns out to be mob money, and racketeer Doyle Lonergan, Robert Shaw, needs to teach these guys a lesson. After corrupt local cop Lieutenant Snyder, Charles Durning, tries to blackmail Johnny for his silence, Luther is killed by Lonergan's men, and Johnny flees town to engage Henry in his revenge. Together, the pair recruit a crew of seasoned con artists, including Ray Walston, who is TV's My Favourite Martian, Harold Gould and Eileen Brennan. They set up a fake betting parlour as the arena in which to take down Lonergan, and then bait the hook by scamming and enraging him in an overnight poker game on a train heading into Chicago. The plot complexities grow as Johnny has to evade Lieutenant Snyder, Lonergan's henchmen, and a mysterious assassin called Celino, all while keeping these dangers from Henry and the rest of the crew so he can keep the con and his revenge going. And then the FBI, led by Dana Elcar, arrives in town to take down Henry in cahoots with Lieutenant Snyder by blackmailing Johnny into a double cross. It's a fun caper film which then ratchets up the tension for the last 15 minutes. And it keeps you guessing. You might know where some of these plot lines are leading, but it's all kept deftly dancing along by director George Roy Hill, reunited here with his leading men from 1969's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which we reviewed in episode 2 of series 3. Robert Shaw is well cast because he just feels dangerous. The week before filming commenced, he badly injured his knee on a wet handball court at the Beverly Hills Hotel, as you do. He had to wear a leg brace under his trousers and incorporated this limp into the gangster's character. Coincidentally, Robert Redford was also recovering from an injury, a broken right thumb from a skiing accident. He was supposed to be wearing a cast, but gets away with using his right hand curiously in some scenes, like handling cutlery. The script, written by David S. Ward, strives for the authenticity of the con artist's glory days. I particularly like this line. Let's see. Horseface Lee, Slim Miller, Suitcase Murphy, and the Big Alabama are in from New Orleans. Crying Jonesy and the Boone Kid from Denver, Dippy Burke and Limehouse Chappie from New York. It just rings of authenticity. The film was released on Christmas Day 1973 and was a box office smash. It won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Director and Original Screenplay. Edith Head, the famous costumier from Hollywood, won her 8th and final Best Costume Design Award, and in her acceptance speech she said, "Just imagine, dressing the 2 handsomest men in the world and then getting this." It was also Redford's only nomination for Best Actor, won that year by Jack Lemmon for Save the Tiger. Personally, I feel that Newman's is the better performance. I'm surprised that he wasn't nominated for Best Supporting Actor, won that year by John Houseman for his law professor in The Paper Chase. The Sting was also the first Oscar-winning picture to have a female producer, Julia Phillips, which is kinda odd given the low profile of female characters in the film. To my mind, the film's one weak point is the only scene with violence. It feels poorly executed, a bit like something out of a paintball tournament. Far better is the scene where technical advisor John Scarn doubled for Paul Newman's hands while performing card tricks and deck switching. Scarn's hands disappear off screen and an invisible cut hides the switch as the camera pans up to Newman's face. I certainly couldn't pick it. Now, before I hand over to Auntie Marie, I did promise you earlier off mic that I would make a connection between this film and yourself. Even though it's a strange choice for a nun, I have discovered that there is a connection between this film, Catholicism, and you, Auntie Marie. Are you ready for this?
No.
David S. Ward, the screenwriter, is also the co-writer of 1986's Saving Grace with Tom Conti as a pope, which I know is a film you really like. But we're moving away from the Pope and back to the mobsters and half-naked ladies. Sister Marie, why do you like this film?
I love the plot, and I love the fact that...
There's a lot to love.
Yeah, there's a lot to love in the plot. And, like, you left... The first time I saw it, now, am I being conned here? No, this is a con. No, it's not a con. And, like, that was the enjoyment of it, trying to work out what was going to happen and then how will they get out of this and what are they going to do now when things had to be changed. But as I said, I watched it with Sister Pat. We thoroughly enjoyed it. We were talking to each other. Are we being conned here? Like in the first con, we didn't even know we were being conned. You know, the henchman was conned and we were conned. But yeah, I thought the acting was superb, and I loved the musical score. I just loved it every time music played. I tuned into the music. Like sometimes you hear music in a film, and it's the background for you. And afterwards, if you played that, you mightn't recognise that it was in that movie. But with this music, you know, it was just so appropriate every time it came in, and with the variations on the theme.
Well, the music, which is Scott Joplin's ragtime, piano pieces. I remember when that film came out. I was too young to see the film, but the entertainer, which is the main piece, was everywhere.
Yeah.
Any child in those days who was learning piano played that piece. It was like the standard piece. It really, it's not of the time when the film is set. It predates it, and yet now you can't disassociate the two.
I also really, really love Robert Redford. I just loved him. And Pat and I, as you know, taught many boys, and Redford reminded us of quite a few of those. With his cheekiness, his sense of fun, his enjoyment of the moment, his loyalty to his friend.
It's
and
really,
just before you go on, though, I want to just, for the people who are listening to this, I want to reassure them, the people at home, that our boys weren't con artists, of course, but some of them did enjoy little pranksters.
It's a fine line.
Well, you know, interesting with Robert Redford and Paul Newman, I think I said this during the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid episode, that I hadn't watched a lot of Robert Redford's younger performance. I'd seen a lot of his older work, Horse Whisperer and all these other older sort of works, and I always found him quite boring, right, in the older roles, and I just found his films quite boring, so I wasn't really a fan. But now, I mean, after watching his younger work, I can just see why he was such a star, because he's got so much energy and so much charisma. But Paul Newman, though, has got the ultimate charisma, and I agree with you, that's a great performance in the film.
Yeah.
I must say, though, I did really enjoy the movie. But it took a little while for me to get into it. I thought the setup was very long. I thought it was 45 minutes in, and I was still going, oh, okay, then look, what's going to happen here? It took a long time for me to
well, the first act gives you Johnny's motivation.
I mean, it does. It takes a long time to get to what, you know, the Paul Newman to come into it really as well. I mean,
but you know, and I think you and I have talked about this before. Sometime maybe in the 1980s, 1990s, storytelling pace really picked up. And if you made that film, if you had that script now, you would probably cut it back to move things along. But that wasn't the style then.
Yeah, but there are
languorous.
Yeah, it's true. But I think the film picks up the pace and then just runs beautifully. So for me anyway, I think some people might think it's fine, and I don't think you had a problem with the pacing probably in the early film.
I actually do see what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think in context, you know, that was a lot of the style. And it's putting all the pieces in place. So it's giving you why Johnny's on the run. It's giving to you why he wants to have revenge because of his mentor. It's giving you what they hold over him, his Luther's family. That's giving you a whole lot of stuff.
I think the whole second half and how that moves and how you are so invested is because of that first 45 minutes.
From the card game is where it really takes off.
Absolutely. But I think it's because of that first 45 minutes that you are so invested that you just go, wow. And there's something else. Everywhere I thought it was going, it just would take me to where but it just kept doing that. It wasn't just once. It was many times, and and that's what I loved about it. The screenplay was so brilliant. There's a lot to love about it in terms of production design. Was amazing. The costume design was phenomenal. Performances were great as well. Robert Shaw.
He died way too young.
He did. But he's wonderful in this. He is scary.
Yes.
You know.
See, I don't find Harvey Keitel that scary in Sister Act.
No, he's not.
I know it's a comedy.
It is. It's hammed up.
I know he's playing almost kind of a figure.
Yeah.
Whereas Robert Shaw is, if you'll pardon the pun because he was in Jaws, is the shark moving in the water.
Yes. He's so brilliant. And the limp. To hear about the limp. I mean, that limp, but without the limp, I mean, he had I thought he might have...
Someone calls him the Gimp at one
That's
stage.
right.
Yeah.
I thought that he got it in the war, and that's an old war wound, that he's had this past history of war, and that's, you know...
No, he tore a number of ligaments off around his knee. It was like quite a serious injury.
Yeah, wow. So there's a lot to love about it. I just found that first 45 minutes, but once it got going, it didn't stop.
You were also nodding furiously when I talked about the paintball scene.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I won't give it away because I don't want to give that away, but I know exactly which part you mean, and I agree with you. It's the most violent sort of section from a quick cut.
It's the only real violent scene.
It is, and
it's meant to shock.
Yes,
but
it is.
Doesn't.
No, it doesn't, because it's. I can't say too much, but it's
It's shock of the fact that it happened, and then when you discover why it happened.
Yes,
but the realisation of it was poorly done.
Yeah, I think it was poorly done as well. I completely
even
agree
for the
with
time.
you. Yeah, I completely agree with you, because none of the other deaths or in it or anything were handled in such a harsh way.
It was almost not pantomime, but it was.
Yeah.
It was caper kind of.
Yeah,
death.
but what? But on that specific one,
yeah,
I found that quite harsh for that specific death.
Did you see that coming? The motivation for that?
No.
That's one of the strings I did pick up on.
No, I didn't pick up on that at all. No. Did you know the diner that they are in was the Back to the Future diner?
Yes, I heard that. Yes,
because they used the same set, the Hollywood set. Yeah.
Was that also, the scene in the railway station when they're scoping him out for the card game?
Yes.
And they say that's the Gimp.
Yes.
Is that the untouchable staircase in the background from Sean Connery and company?
I'd have to look again.
I think it might be, because that was a train station.
It was,
and it was a Chicago story, wasn't it?
It was.
I think that's the same station. Which
Yeah, I'd have to have a look.
Unintended resonance.
I mean, look, the movie itself, I mean, the director, he tries to make it like a 1930s caper film. I mean, that's the homage there is all the way through the title cards and everything. It's like it is like an old 1930s caper film. And so he brings that flavour. Even the cinematography is, reflects that as well. Because even at that time in 1973, the quality of the actual cinematography wasn't like that in 1973. I mean, they really went for that look.
Well, George Roy Hill went for it, in a serious way. So he went back and watched a lot of those old films.
Yeah.
And he realised that in many street scenes, for example, there weren't many extras on the street at
That's
all.
right,
so
yeah.
Jimmy Cagney gets shot and dies in the street and there's no one around. And so they do the same thing. There's not a lot of bustling scenes.
No, there's not.
It's almost empty, so you focus on the characters in those places as well. But he's trying to pick up on the... It's funny he chooses the anachronistic music from 20 years prior, but he's really trying to pick up on the style of the that genre, if you like.
Absolutely.
That era. I also really liked the fact that it was one of those sort of cast films where it's not just the stars and everyone else is kind of wallpaper. It really was very generous to all the other actors, a lot of whom, if you're of a certain age, you'd recognise their faces probably more from TV, like Harold Gould and Ray Walston and so on. Eileen Brennan maybe from different movies, particularly in the 70s. But what I really liked about it, I think it was at the very end rather than the start, but the credits were very generous. Rather than saying, Paul Newman, look at Paul dealing cards and so on. Robert Redford, look at him running through the streets or, smooching a waitress, whatever it was. But then you get the names of the actors and you see them from the film, which I don't think was that common back in the 70s. But it really treated them with respect. It was an ensemble. It really was an ensemble piece, which I really liked about it.
I enjoyed it being a drama with things that engaged your mind to try and work out, but it was also a comedy. And as I said, I was really caught up with Robert Redford.
Yeah.
The expression on his face when he was having the manicure done.
Do you know who was offered that part before him?
No.
And turned it down? It was Jack Nicholson.
Oh, truly?
Which again would have been a very different film.
A very different film. Robert Redford was actually thought of as Michael Corleone in The Godfather.
Which came out the previous year. I didn't know that.
And he was brought up as a potential Michael. That would have been a very different film as well.
The other thing that struck me, I think I've seen this film a long time ago, I think. But what really struck me this time around is how the caper, the con artists, are a bit like filmmakers. So they had this empty space that was like a falling down suite of rooms, whatever it was, and they turn it into something that looks enough like a real betting parlour to con the gangster Lonergan. You've got all the extras kind of sitting around until they're on, and you've got Newman basically as the director. It was almost like a little microcosm metaphor for the process of filmmaking as well.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, it's an amazing setup. It's an amazing setup. Please, audience, if you haven't watched The Sting, you've got to give it a go, because it's a very you won't guess it. It's very clever, and it's a clever screenplay.
I also want to say that, like Sister Act, this has also been turned into a stage musical that premiered in only about 4 years ago, March 2018, and the role of Henry, the Paul Newman character, played by Harry Connick Jr.
Oh wow!
Which I'm not sure how that would go.
Well, The Sting 2 did come out.
Oh, that was pretty terrible.
Apparently, it was very terrible.
Jackie Gleason and somebody.
Yeah, Jackie Gleason, but also there was Oliver Reed
as the gangster.
As Robert Shaw's character. Apparently, it didn't get great reviews.
No, I don't think it. Well, The Sting actually got rave reviews.
Oh, The Sting did, but then not
Ebert
The Sting 2.
And Siskel and whoever else. Yes, it got rave reviews, but yeah, not so much Sting 2.
No, that's right. So, Auntie Marie, out of 10, what are you going to give The Sting? I mean, is it one of your favourites?
It was not. I wouldn't say now that it's one of my favourites, but it's something that I enjoyed back then. Like Hopscotch, I enjoyed that and watched that about 3 times at that stage too.
Well, sorry to interrupt you. That's interesting, because I meant to mention that earlier.
Yeah.
I know that 2 of your favourite films are The Sting and Hopscotch, which is not all that well-remembered film with Walter Matthau, doing great Walter Matthau, and Glenda Jackson. But again, it's a caper film, which is not what someone would expect of, a nun. So what is it about caper films but seriously, what is it about caper films that, engage you so?
Oh, just the great plot and taking people in, being able to really... that was a great con in Hopscotch.
Have you seen Hopscotch?
No.
Oh, haven't you? I don't... Well, I enjoyed it. But let me say that if there'd been another choice tonight, we couldn't have it because you'd already done it, but it would have been The Sound of Music.
Of course.
Is that out of 10 for you, Sound of Music?
Sound of Music out of 10, 9.5.
What did you give it in the end, 9?
I forget.
I think so. You'd never seen it before.
Yeah, I've never seen it before.
I think you gave it a 9.
Yeah.
I put that on as a school musical. I produced it.
Oh, right. Oh, wow.
And Pat was she was the choreographer. And it was great fun. Like, we used to just, we had the whole school in it. Every kid in the school, we only had about 280 kids, but they were all in it. It was a whole school production.
So
what do I give this
Sting?
one?
Yeah.
8.5.
And I'm giving it an 8 out of 10.
I'm giving it a 7.
Oh.
Yeah, wow.
And it's partly the paint, what I'm calling the paintball scene, did undermine it a bit. I know it's only one moment, but it's all done with such charm and joy, and it's a clever script, which is why it's up there for me.
I was erring on a 7. I was nearly there. I was going on a 7, but the thing is, the screenplay, it became so clever, and the plot changing all the way through. I just thought it became. I was suddenly really enjoying it. So and then that I could not work out where it was going.
No, that was a good part
and
of it.
it's a good part of it, isn't it? Because you don't see films like that. I usually know where it's going, and it usually probably has one twist or whatnot. But this has quite a few, and so it's clever. And so the cleverness of the screenplay, as well as the production, made me forget about the 45 minutes that I was getting a little bit bored.
That's why I mark it down a bit, and unfairly probably.
Yeah.
But because I've watched a lot of con man kind of TV shows, so Leverage and Hustle, the American and the British ones.
I haven't.
That's okay. But, so I've seen that kind of plot a lot since. But it's an unfair rating because at the time, none of that stuff existed. It almost created its own genre, really.
And that concludes our And Then There Were Nuns episode.
You did that so well.
Thank you so much, Auntie Marie, for joining us on our podcast.
It's taken us a long time to get to this point. There were always things that got in the way, but now that we finally got you here in our very high-tech studio, Marie, how have you found the experience?
Well, I would give this experience a 9.9 recurring score.
Now, I need to explain to you, as far as Marie's concerned, as a maths teacher, mathematician,
Yes.
she believes that 9.9 recurring is exactly the same number as 10.
Okay, great.
It is. Do you want me to do it on paper to
No.
show you? No,
But the reason that she puts it that way is she wants you to know that you never quite achieve my excellence.
Yeah, right.
No, as I said before, I love listening to you, but to actually see you engaging and interacting, it's been a marvellous evening.
Oh, it's
I've
great.
thoroughly enjoyed myself.
We can't promise that to most of our listeners, by the way. Let's just be really clear. This is a small room.
But I've found your input and your thoughts on the films just riveting, and your stories have just been fantastic. So I've really enjoyed listening to you as well.
We need to now look forward.
We are. So on our next episode, we are looking at New Zealand films. So
Kiwi films.
Kiwi films. The first film we're going to be looking at is 1994's Once Were Warriors.
Yes. And then The Frighteners, a not terribly well-known early film by director Peter Jackson from Lord of the Rings fame from 1996.
And then we are going to look at 2016's film Hunt for the Wilder People.
So are we inviting a Kiwi nun? Is this now the way we do things?
See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.